I call the honourable member, Dr. David Clark.
Good choice. Very, very kind, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, there have been several points raised by the Honourable Leanne Dalzell that I wish to pick up on. The first amongst them is the shambles that is Moby. She spoke about how Department of Building and Housing would better be out, the Department of Labour would better be out. It's true also that health and safety is something that needs specific attention. This government is talking about pulling that out. It's folded things in, it's pulling them out. There's a huge amount of cost that has gone into that particular organisation over recent years. Minister Joyce, until now, has avoided answering questions on the costs of restructuring and rebranding Moby. It's an organisation that is not performing terribly well. Mr. Joyce himself was unable to answer questions before Select Committee recently in the public session on the costs of restructuring in the organisation. We had Morst and Forced as one limb in there. They got divorced. Then we had MSI, which couldn't reconcile them, and so on and so forth. There are a bunch of departments shoved in together with no seeming logic to it, and they are not performing well. There are ones that should come out. Mr. Speaker, this is a shambles, what's going on in Moby, and we're only just touching the surface of it. This bill, the State Sector and Public Finance Reform Bill, is one that we will of course be supporting, and the title could be different to bring into the title and commencement discussion. We could call it an Ease of Good Government Bill. We are delighted that the government has seen fit to include changes that were put through in the Finance and Expenditure Committee at Labour's behest and the state sector unions, which have averted disaster for government workers who were set to lose their redundancy entitlements and employment rights. We are pleased that members of that committee could work together to ensure that those things didn't happen. We voted against this bill initially and now are supporting it, and that is as a result of that committee taking a longer view and saying this legislation needs to survive institutions. It needs to survive different governments, and so those things have made this a better bill. We could also call it the Can't Stop Bad Policy Bill, because no matter how good the regulations are and how smoothly the apparatus of government works, you can't account for bad policy. You just simply can't, Mr. Speaker. Nobody can, not even you. If a government wishes to push bad policy through, it can do that despite legislation. It can pursue anything it wants to. We know, for example, in the electricity sector, that power prices are going up and up and up and up. John Key says that Kiwis are paying about the right amount for power. Most of New Zealand disagrees with him, I think, and this government is pursuing that same strategy with the same electricity sector that it's always had, with prices continuing to rise. That is something that Labour thinks we need to do something about. So this kind of bill will actually enable good policy to be put in place more cleanly. It will mean that the apparatus of government is not tied up with unnecessary reporting or overly burdensome reporting. It will hopefully be more effectual in reporting the kinds of things that the public needs and wants to know about. That it will be accountable to the public, that government is held accountable to the public in an appropriate way, with a minimum burden on officials to deliver accountability mechanisms, but an appropriate one. It's a balance, as I've said earlier. So again, we could call it the State Sector and Public Finance Reform Providing Balance Bill. We could put a brackets in there, Mr. Speaker. That would be an alternative name. I think some of these names I'm discussing will be considered by the Minister and the Chair, who I can see is deep in thought, and I would welcome the Minister and the Chair's views on the appropriateness of these terms as he thinks them over, because part of the job of us here in Parliament is to decide just which names for bills are appropriate, because as people search through them online, and I know I've searched through bills online, sometimes they're hard to locate. Sometimes it's hard to find the bill you're looking for because it's named in a way that is not intuitive, and I think that bills ought to be named in a way that are accessible for the public. This bill here does, Mr. Chair.
The Honourable Member David Clark.
This bill here does pick up good governance practices. It attempts to make sure that things are done in a transparent way, that there's sanctions and rewards for departments, that they're clearly laid out, that they're reported transparency, that there are clear lines of accountability. We see in this bill the State Services Commissioner's role outlined for the first time ever in a way that now means that we can better understand what his or her role is in the state sector, and we can see how they can move their own resources around from chief executives from one area to another much more easily as a vacancy arises, and so on. These smoothing of the paths of government should indeed, over the longer term, make for a better government. Now, the point I raised earlier, though, Mr. Speaker, is incredibly relevant, that these policies of themselves, this bill, the actions taken in this bill, will not stop a government putting bad policies in place. They simply can't. If the government, like this one, thinks that the current housing shortage in New Zealand is simply unavoidable, and if we carry on with the same policies, suddenly magically houses will appear, despite rates of new house builds dropping steadily over the last 20 years, that may be their ideology. They can stick to it. This bill will do nothing, absolutely nothing to address that. Labor, on the other hand, thinks that we need proactive policies, and that, so for example, the Kiwi Build policy that Mr. Paseta Lotuinga over there is admiring from afar, but knows that he cannot publicly endorse, is a policy that will improve the lot of Kiwis. For those who cannot afford currently housing, we know that this kind of policy, the New Zealand Kiwi Build policy, will actually make the world a better place for them. So that's why Labor is committing to 10,000 new houses a year with the Kiwi Build policy, affordable houses, 10,000 new houses a year, and affordable housing for New Zealanders, because we think that that's a priority. Likewise with New Zealand, the energy sector, the New Zealand Power proposal will make sure that ordinary Kiwi families pay $300 less a year for their power bills. Now that's significant because New Zealand families are struggling. This government has the worst economic record of any government in the last 50 years, 50 years, Mr. Lotuinga, I'm glad you asked, and that terrible economic record needs to be addressed, but this government seems to have no plan to do that. And this piece of legislation will not give the government good ideas. It will only enable governments that have good ideas to put them into practice in a timely, effective and efficient way. So the real effects of this legislation will have to wait for a future Labor government, I suspect. This government is doing the right thing by putting the conditions for good government in place, but unfortunately they seem to lack a plan that will really appeal to New Zealanders and make it a better place for New Zealanders, for ordinary New Zealanders to live in. As inequalities rise, they don't seem willing to put in place the kind of necessary economic changes, more savings, pro-growth tax policy and monetary policy reform that would actually improve the lot of ordinary Kiwis. Instead, we see median wages dropping in New Zealand consistently under this government. Kiwis are struggling, small businesses are struggling, and it's because this government is prepared to sit on its hands and stick with the policies of the 80s that have not been working for so very long now, sadly. So this legislation will mean that policies that are good, that the Labor government has, can be introduced in an effective and efficient way in years to come. It will not help this government that has no plan to reform the economy in the meantime, because they'll carry on doing what they're doing, which is just a hands-off approach, hands off the steering wheel as the economy goes further and further towards the interests of those who already have and further away from the interests of the have-nots in our country. Mr. Speaker, Labor is very happy to support this legislation. As I said at the beginning, we are pleased with the changes that have been made in Select Committee to avert the disaster for government workers who are set to lose their redundancy entitlements and employment rights. We congratulate the PSA and the CTU for their good work, and I congratulate the members of the committee who worked together to make sure that this legislation didn't end up dividing the House, but instead ended up being legislation that, with some reservations, the Labour Party it will happily support. I am looking forward to the Minister's contribution from the Chair. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Trevor Mallard.